It's my pleasure now to introduce Phil O'Reilly, who is known to many of you, but I'd like to just go through his extraordinary list of talents and jobs. It's quite amazing. Phil is the Chief Executive of Business New Zealand, as many of you will know. It's New Zealand's largest business advocacy group, which includes 4 large regional business associations, the Major Companies Group, Export New Zealand, more than 70 affiliated industry associations, and Buy New Zealand Made. Phil works with the government and other key decision makers on issues of concern to business and the economy. Internationally, Phil represents New Zealand employers at the International Labour Organisation, contributes to the government body of the ILO, and is a delegate to the Business and Industry Advisory Council of the OECD. Nationally, Phil chairs the government's Capitalising on Research and Development Action Group, the Redundancy and Employment Transition Advisory Group, is joint chair of the New Zealand Workplace Health and Safety Council, and is a board member of the Foundation for Research, Science and Technology. That one may be a bit out of date, I'm not sure. And the Royal Society of New Zealand, and serves on a number of other ministerial and advisory groups. Very importantly, and Phil, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think you're an Aucklander as well, and if I'm not wrong, from Te Atatu. So it's great to welcome you back, and please can you join me in welcoming Phil O'Reilly.
Well, good morning, Mayor Len and councillors and distinguished guests, and if the undistinguished guests, welcome to you too. It's fantastic to be here. You might ask a question about why the fella from Business New Zealand, all the way from Wellington, and thanks very much for holding it here, it saved me a taxi fare, is coming to speak at the launch of the Auckland Economic Development Strategy. Well, I should, as you've just heard, I should wear my Aucklandness on my sleeve. It's not often I can do that. I can't do that in Dunedin. I'm actually an Aucklander by birth. I grew up in Mount Roskill, which back then, when I was a young fella back in the 1990s, no really, back when I grew up, was very much part of West Auckland. So I'm a Westie, actually. I'm not just an Aucklander, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Westie. If I had hair, I'd have a mullet. I still have a strange love of Blackford Falcons. So I'm very much an Aucklander. My brother and my family still live here, and so I'm very much of this city. I just happen to live in Wellington these days. But there's another more serious reason, of course, why it's quite important, and you've just heard it both from Len and from Sam, and it's very simple, that if Auckland fails, New Zealand fails. Just that simple, really simple stuff. So it's mission critical that you succeed. And let me turn that more positively. If Auckland succeeds, it's more likely that Taihape succeeds, and it's more likely that Oamaru succeeds. And the reason is that Auckland is such a powerhouse of intellectual capital, of capital more generally, of infrastructure, of world connectedness, and potentially of exports and so on, that if you succeed, then the knock-on impact, even to small rural and regional towns throughout the country, will be significant, let alone knock-on impacts into large cities like Hamilton or Wellington or Christchurch or Dunedin. So the fact that you fail or succeed matters deeply to everyone else. So no wonder I'd be here speaking on not only as an Aucklander, but also on behalf of business in New Zealand to say the journey that you kind of formally launch yourself on today with the launch of the strategy matters quite deeply to everybody else. And there's a message in there. I was talking to a bloke in Tauranga a little while ago about the importance of Auckland, this new agglomeration, this new thing. The power of cities, which we all know about from the research, the power of big cities matters deeply to economic development. And he said, oh, why can't it be Tauranga? Well, it just can't. That's the reality. It's got to be Auckland. So there's a real issue about making sure that your story is connected everywhere else, so that the business community in Wellington, or that the business community in Christchurch, or the business community in Tauranga, for that matter, can feel as though they are a part of this story. So it's not just something that happens north of the Bombays, if you like. It's about actually connecting into not just the Auckland story, but what Auckland means for New Zealand. So I'd encourage you to think that through, so that people outside of Auckland can just as easily engage in what's going on here, can understand it, and can feel as though they can influence if it's important to them. I'd particularly like to thank and acknowledge the officials from Auckland Council and ATEED and the rest who've spent the time putting this together. I know that politicians tend to get all the congratulations when things go well, and some of the blame too when they go badly. But as one who works a lot with officials in Wellington and indeed in Auckland as well, I know that a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the hard grind of actually putting this together would have fallen to you. So I'd particularly like to acknowledge Doug Mackay and his team, and Harvey, and of course my good friend Brett at ATEED for all the work that they've done, and I know that a number of business people and others in Auckland have helped them do that work. So I just wanted to acknowledge those who are not necessarily the most public face of this thing. So very important, congratulations. Congratulations on the launch of your strategies. Businesses like strategies. They like them so long as they're not kind of Stalinist 5-year plans that say we're going to build tractors. They really like strategies, and the reason is if they know what government's doing, more or less, then it's much more likely that they will invest a buck faster and hire a person quicker if they can see that government, of whatever stripe, either national or local, is attempting to help them in that process. So that's the first reason businesses like strategies. And the second reason they like strategies is it makes people more able to be held to account. In other words, businesses can say, well, what's happening here? You said you'd do this, why aren't you doing that? And there's a really important point, which I'll come back to at the end. It also enables the council and the officers of the council and the officials and central government to hold business to account too. To say, well, actually, this is important that we all get involved. So strategies are quite helpful so long as they're done well and so long as they're long-lived. Governments have a bad habit of coming up with a new one every Tuesday, so I'm not going to turn up next Tuesday to your next strategy launch because this is the one for the next little while. Thanks very much. These long-lived kind of strategies that sometimes are boring and difficult and hard and complex are nevertheless very, very important, as I say, not only for unlocking investment quicker, but also as an accountability mechanism either side. So congratulations on that. And I must say, from a personal perspective, as an Aucklander who's lived here a great part of my life, and I still visit it several times a week, the aims that you've got about creating a livable city that's prosperous and productive and internationally competitive, and let me just back up Len's point completely, that your competitor is no longer Wellington or Christchurch. Your competitor is Vancouver, your competitor is Sydney, your competitor is Singapore. That's how you need to look at it, and you need to engage the rest of New Zealand in your journey of looking at it in that way. And if you do that alone, actually, if you can change the conversation to that alone, that has a huge impact on the business mindset and propensity and willingness to invest. So that the internationally competitive, outward-facing, global city that's thriving and inclusive, all fantastic stuff, and nobody could argue with it, and I certainly wouldn't, and in fact, I'd absolutely support it. And what's more, what I like about the strategy is that it's highly ambitious without being OTT, without being so ridiculously over-ambitious that nobody believes you could ever achieve it. So more than 6% average annual growth in regional exports, big goal, but feels achievable if you do the kinds of things and you execute them well and you get a lot of support for them that you've got on the document itself. More than 5% annual growth in GDP from a recent average of 2.9. If you could achieve that, you'd have a big knock-on to the rest of the country, so that matters. And a more than 2% average annual productivity growth, and this is where Len's comments about high-speed broadband, infrastructure, planning and so on, they matter quite a lot, because if you can unleash those new dollars, those new high-value jobs, you're going to get that kind of productivity growth. The other thing that I liked about the strategy was that it showed things that were quintessentially Auckland. One of the dangers of all of these strategy documents, as I was saying to Doug Mackay the other night, I don't know if they still make twink. They did when I was a kid. Do they still make twink? Anyway, the trick is, the danger is that you could just twink out Auckland off that thing and put in San Francisco and it'll look the same. And some bits of it are like that. Which city doesn't need to be very business friendly? Well, every city would say they want to be business friendly. Which city wouldn't want to have high-speed broadband? Every city says that. Which city wouldn't say they want world-class infrastructure? Well, they all say that, right? So everybody knows that, and that's cool that you have all that, and that's very important because those really do matter. How does it play out in the sense of Auckland? So you don't want to be as successful as Sydney. No, that's not the game. What you want to be is the most successful Auckland you can be. That's the point. So I think part of the dreaming that goes on about how you execute this plan has got to take that into account. We have a bad habit in New Zealand of sometimes slavishly following others' examples in totality. We sort of absolutely say we're going to do that just because it seemed to work in that environment. Well, there's a difference between Auckland and Sydney. Auckland is not full of Australians, thankfully. So there's... My wife's Australian. I shouldn't say that. She's not here. She's in Australia, actually, which is good. So That's helpful. She definitely won't hear me say that, which is good. So this is full of Aucklanders. This is the largest Pacific city on earth, for example. This has particularities that are both exciting and challenging that no other city has. So the trick is, how do you do the things that everybody would want to do, but how do you do those things in such a way using the kinds of tools that you need to do to make sure that it's quintessentially about Auckland? And that's very, very important. I see a lot of that kind of language in there. The trick will be to keep honest to that, to keep at that, to keep doing that. And of course, you've got a great roadmap out over the next 10 years or so, and roadmaps are fantastic stuff. And as Len just reminded us, execution is the key. There's a great saying in business that 10 mediocre ideas executed well always beat one brilliant idea not executed properly at all. So execution is key, and I'll come to that in a minute because it's clear that you've got a few mountains to climb. Firstly, there's the need to shift from a domestic to an international focus. That's some of the sloganising I hear around the rest of New Zealand about Auckland talks about that. You're busy feeding yourselves and making coffee for yourselves. So that incredibly exciting opportunity to shift to an international focus, and particularly when you're talking about high-value goods and services. So as both Len and Sam have noted, you need to become a producer of technology in a really big way. And Len, I'm also a big fan of ATI being on the Wynyard Quarter. As some of you may know, the idea from ATI came out of a report called Powering Innovation, which was a magnificent report, might I say, a fantastic report, absolutely faultless in every respect. I say that because I helped write it. And the idea of ATI came out of that, and we really said to government in that report it needed to be close to business. It needed to be headquartered in a place that was iconic, that businesses would want to attend, that would want to be at. And the Owen Glen School at Auckland University, actually I know Greg Whitwood's here, going to agree, that's a classic example of what's happened. Before the Owen Glen building was built, how many business people would have been to Auckland University Business School? Not many, because you couldn't find it. It was a rabbit warren of stuff off the back of Simon Street somewhere. Now, how many business people would have been to it? Most, I suspect, almost all of the influential business people of Auckland. Gives Greg and his team a great opportunity to engage, because it's a place that business people want to be. So when government said, well, okay, if we buy that, where would you put it then? Where does business want to be? I said, it's obvious. Businesses want to be where their bars and restaurants are. So Wynyard it is. Len, my view, very simple, just that logic. So that's how I'm pushing it. It's the beer and food quotient, me most of all. So ATI will be a helpful part of that. And might I also say the announcements from Auckland University yesterday, while we're on that subject, of potential purchase of the Lion Brewery site, and I know Doug McKyle, that's his old home, so he'll be particularly interested in that transaction. That's another quite exciting piece, because once again, it's inevitable that business and academics will rub up against each other on a site like that. It's so close to where businesses are and where businesses want to be. The idea of actually creating these kinds of porous arrangements and porous institutions where business people and scientists are more likely to bump into each other and actually have shared value that comes out of that relationship, very, very important. So I was very supportive of that yesterday when it was announced with Stuart McCutcheon. So that's all fantastic stuff. Your work developing clusters is also quite important. We're working on a piece of research now, and it's some research with some very good overseas scholars about the importance of clusters. And the cluster work that you're doing, I was just making the point to Len a minute ago, that you can actually do some of this a bit better than New Zealand can, if you like, because you've got a bound-up regional piece to you. It's a little more easy to get your hands around, if you like, from an Auckland perspective. So the clusters work's quite helpful. ICT, screen, tourism, food and bev, construction and engineering, as you just heard from Stephen, marine, niche manufacturing, health, technologies, international education, biotech, and maybe some others will emerge, because one of the wonderful things about this stuff is that you just guess it. A lot of it's just about serendipity. So that stuff matters quite a lot, and the way in which you develop new businesses that you've never heard of before will also be a big part of that. I mean, I make the point in Wellington that someone had said to me 15 years ago that there'll be a movie precinct in Miramar, and it will have won 10 or 12 Academy Awards. I would have said, what drugs are you on? Because I want some, because that was very boring, Miramar, when I was first arrived in Wellington all those years when I had hair and only one chin. So this idea of innovation is a very important part of the shifting from a domestic to an international focus. Another one is skills. That'll be a big part of your focus, I know, and you've got some good plans in the document. The trick there will be what's national and what's local. So industries tend to think about skills development from a national frame. there'll be a real challenge, I think. It'll be a good challenge, but it'll be a challenge to try and get that focus happening locally and regionally in such a way that you don't have an or conversation, but that you have an and conversation. That'll be quite important. And the last one I'd raise in terms of the mountains to climb is green growth. I know that that's a particular personal love of Len, and I'm certainly I love it too. It's very, very important. The greening of the world is fantastic for New Zealand, and no more so than this town, because you've got some great opportunities to make that happen. And my challenge to you is to actually help green every business. I think that's the most radical thought of all. Some say that's not very radical. I think it's incredibly radical, actually. So greening your growth. How do you make sure that you engage mainstream businesses who otherwise wouldn't actually think about doing this in this journey? Because that's actually a fantastic branding opportunity about the livable nature of the city and, of course, the way in which you go to market in the world. So I'd certainly encourage those kinds of activities. Here's some challenges. I'll finish with 3 challenges for you. Just 3. I could come up with 12, but we don't have that much time. First, keep it Auckland. Engage New Zealand, but keep it Auckland. The point I made about you can easily slip into you could twink the plan and it could be San Francisco or Sydney. Keep to the spirit, keep to the knitting of what is this about creating the best Auckland we can be, which will have some bits inevitably that will always be a challenge and some bits that will always be stellar. How do we create the best Auckland we can have? Second, how do we create, and Len was talking about this, so I'm encouraged by his comments here, how can we create foreign direct investment for growth? So a lot of the foreign direct investment that comes into Auckland buys existing assets. That's fantastic, no problem there at all, because it often means they survive and grow. That's good. How do we get foreign direct investment in for brand new businesses, for brand new opportunities? Some of that will come out of the innovation piece. Some of it will come out of the new business growth. Some of it will come out of international education and the linkages that are born there. So that's an important and chunky piece of what you're doing. The third and last piece, and by far the largest challenge, is this challenge: engage, engage, engage. One of the real problems I see with some of these innovation plans when they come out, so the economic development plans when they come out, is that it turns into a bit of a spectator sport. You know, what's government doing about ... enter your own slogan here, whatever your slogan is. And so sort of businesses and other people sort of sit back and say, oh, it's your plan. What are you doing about blah, 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 blah. You people, all of us in this room, need to commit ourselves to such a process of engagement with each other so that we all say, when that person inevitably does that, because someone will say, oh, what's the government doing about ... that we can all say, no, what are you doing about ... because we're doing this stuff. We, us, not just government, not just business, not just academics, not just councillors. What are we doing? What's our joint accountability to bring this about? So how do we hold each other to account? And I notice in the report and the strategy, there's a couple of formal committees you've got. I'm on one in the innovation space, which is great. But it'll require much more than that. It'll require a day-to-day rubbing up against business people and other actors in this place to make sure that we all hold ourselves to account and that it becomes our plan as much as anybody else's plan, and that we are loyal to it and that we understand its foibles and we are prepared to commit to making it a better thing over time. So engage, 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 not just with Auckland, but with other players in New Zealand as well, because by doing that, you've got the best chance of New Zealand being more successful as a result of your stellar success over the next 10 years. I wish you well. Thanks for your time.